Hi, I'm Kurt, and this is part 2 of my 1940 build. We're going to try in this episode to find out if this old flathead has compressed. Well, first, will it crank over? Does it have compression? And can we get it to actually start up? It currently does not have the exhaust manifold on the right-hand side of the engine because that is one of the parts that I purchased this car for to fix my 1940 Mercury. So it is kind of an incomplete engine at this point. The coil's missing. The manifold's missing. There's obviously the fuel lines are not connected. And this has not ran in many, many years. It was locked up when we got it, but we were able to get the engine to free up when I was pulling it with a rope. Don't know if it's going to start. We're going to find out today. So first thing, I took the battery out of my Mercury and we're going to hook it up and see if we can't get this starter to roll over. It is a positive ground system. So the positive battery terminal hooks directly to the block, and the negative is what hooks up to your solenoid. Backwards from a modern car completely, but that is how it works. And we have the battery connected, and we don't see any smoke or flames from any wires shorting out, which is a really good sign. However, it looks like the only thing I've hooked up here is the solenoid. And there's no other wiring coming off of this. That is weird. I'm not sure this is wired out correctly because they have the wire going down to the starter as being connected to the power wires. I am going to go look at my 1940 Mercury and figure out if this solenoid is even wired correctly, because looking at it, I can bring in here, I honestly don't understand. I hooked up the positive cable from the battery is running to the cylinder head, which is also grounding the body. Positive ground, right? The negative cable, I assume is this, hooks up to the solenoid and there's no other wire coming off, but on the other side of the solenoid, they have the wires that would generally feed the wiring harness. But the only time that could get power would be when it was activated. So I'm pretty sure somebody's got some wiring screwed up in here. And we're going to start with trying to figure out what's going on there. Luckily, I have the wiring diagram on my 1940 Mercury to go look at. All right, so I'm out looking at the Mercury here, and just as I thought, this is wired completely different. The cable is running to that side of the solenoid, which has the wires connected to the wiring harness, and this side that they have the terminal hooked up to is running directly down to the starter. So this is completely different than what we have out there, and this car ran. So I think what I have to do is switch these two pieces on the starter, because here is the feed off the battery and this one runs down to the starter, which is the exact opposite of what I have on the other car. Yeah, so looking at the Ford, they had the battery terminal on the outside rather than the inside, and then they had the start wire. I think I have to switch these two around in order to make that work. Somebody put this together backwards. This is the way the other one's wired. I should have power running into the switch on the inside. So I'm gonna see if we have any power to the push button start. And we'll see what it does here. My guess is that it doesn't. The wiring in this car is in terrible condition. We'll find out right now. Nothing. All right, so I got no clicking from the push button. So we're gonna jump the solenoid and see if it'll crank. All right, so the push button start doesn't work. We're gonna try and jump the solenoid here with this and see what happens. Well, sounds like the starter's gonna turn over. I do have stuff in the cylinders, so before I get sprayed with a whole bunch of fluid, I'm going to find myself a guard to set over the engine before we crank it over. All right, well, I feel like I've adequately protected myself from being sprayed with fluid. Let's find out if the thing will actually crank over. Alright, yeah, I hardly have anything in the cylinders because it's not coming out at all. This car might run. Yeah. You can touch it right to the battery. Compression on them ones. Let's see what we got over here. I would definitely say it's time for the compression test. I feel like I got compression on every cylinder. So yeah, I'm gonna go grab my compression tool and we're gonna find out what we got here. All right, so I got the compression tester installed. We're gonna see what we got. First one. I got 100 pounds. I think this engine's gonna run. And then I went and said that. I have 10 pounds. Let me try that again. Yeah, it worked its way up to 25, so that one's definitely not good, but there is compression there. It's making compression. So my guess is there's some really leaky valve or rings. Ready? And next one. We got up to about 70 pounds there, so not as good as the first, but it's got compression. We'll hit this next one, and then we may have to find a battery charger quick because it sounds like the battery's already getting weak. So 3 so far have some compression. I don't know if you call 25 pounds compression, but it's not 0. Which means the valves are at least moving. I would think that they have to be moving. All right, and last one on this side. Gave me 75. So 3 out of 4 cylinders on this side, I would say have healthy enough compression to run. Let's see what this one's got. Wow, 125 pounds of compression. I mean, I do have, like I said, I put WD-40 and transmission fluid in the cylinder, so to kind of lubricate the rings. But that's a lot of compression for what I was expecting to get out of this. We may have a running flathead here. Obviously that one cylinder's down, but if that's just some dirt on the valves because it's been stuck open for many years, that could come back just by running it a bit. So cylinder 2, what do we got? 100. So I'm not getting even compression, but I'm getting compression. Over 80 pounds. All right, here we are for the final cylinder. Does it have compression? Yes, it does. That one made almost, well, over 110 pounds. So, wow, we really have one cylinder that didn't do well. Let me retry that one again. All right, and I'm gonna retry this cylinder and see what we get. Well, I'd say we're getting about 40 pounds, which is 20 pounds better than it was the first time I tested it. When I tried to get my 1940 Mercury running, I had a cylinder that had 0 pounds in it. And just from messing, well, I shouldn't say that. I had one cylinder that I couldn't get to fire because the intake valve was stuck open. I could physically see the valve would not close all the way, and it was popping through the carburetor. I thought I was going to have to pull the whole engine apart, and all it took was a little time and cranking it over, and that valve sealed itself shut, and that engine runs perfect. I really think this thing has a good chance of starting and running. So let's find out what we can do about getting an ignition system. So the easiest way to test and see if your points are going to work is you go from your, well, negative side of the battery, because this is positive ground. And if you have contact for your coil at some point when you roll the engine over, which I'm just going to do it with the starter, that light should be flashing on and off when the points make contact. So you can see how if I touch the distributor, it lights up. If I touch this point, it does not. So no surprise to me whatsoever, the points are not working correctly. In fact, I 100% assumed that was going to happen, which is why I pulled the radiator out before I did anything, because these things are not fun to take apart. So I'm going to get the points cleaned up so we can get contact. And if I can't get this distributor to work, I'll steal it out of my other car. But I'm pretty sure I can make this one work by cleaning up the contact points. So we're going to start with that and pull it apart here. All right, so one thing on these old ones, the distributor caps, they kind of swell themselves into the case of the distributor, and you can't get them out without breaking them. So to get the points out, I'm pretty sure, yeah, both of these are stuck. I can't get in there at all. Yeah, they don't budge. So what I'm pretty sure I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the whole distributor off the housing here, and I'm going to slide the center of the distributor out so I can get to the point mechanism without having to take the caps off, because otherwise you have no access to get to them. All right, so I removed the distributor assembly with all the wires attached because it's just the only way you can do it with these caps. So the next step is going to be to take the vacuum brake assembly off so I can disassemble the actual distributor to get down inside there to the dual points and see what kind of condition they're in. So I'm going to go ahead and get that pulled apart. All right, so we're going to remove the vacuum brake assembly, which consists of this housing, a spring, and then down inside here there's a piston right there that is used to actually slow down the rotating assembly of the distributor to adjust your vacuum advance. But it works as a vacuum brake rather than an advance. All right, now hopefully without too much difficulty I can get this gasket saved and I can get this disassembled. I was lucky enough to save the gasket, so now I just got to try and get it apart. I'm going to take and tap the center section and see if I can get it to knock loose, but this part sometimes gets stuck and it may take some effort. Yeah, this is going to take a little bit of work. I'm going to get this pulled apart and I'll show you what I have to do to the points. All right, so after a lot of wiggling back and forth, you can see how much rust was on here. I finally got it to release itself from the housing. So what we have to do is get in here and clean up these points. They are opening and closing like they're supposed to. So it's more or less the rust that's in there, just not allowing them to close. So I'm going to get this all cleaned up. We'll test it before we put it back in to make sure that we'll end up with spark. But hopefully this will work. They actually look like they're in pretty good shape too, so hopefully I just have to clean them. You can now see I can turn the light on and off by rotating the distributor, which means the points are making contact and opening and closing. So in theory, I should be able to put the distributor back together. We should be able to make this thing have spark. All right, to test our contacts to see if I was successful. All right, we have a light lit up right now. So as I roll it over, it should flash on and off, which it is, and there it's off. It's still off. I can roll the engine back a little bit, it'll turn on, meaning the points are opening and closing like they're supposed to. Theoretically, if we put power to a coil, we should have spark. So I'm gonna go ahead, get all the spark plugs thrown back in the engine, and I'm gonna find an ignition coil that we can bolt on here that should be able to make this thing have spark. And hopefully we can dump a little gas down it and make some noise. We'll see what happens. So I've gone ahead and I've got all the spark plugs back in it. I've hooked up a coil. When I go to put the coil to power, I'm getting some sparks, which shows me that the coil should be energized through the points. Hopefully the coil's good. Got myself some Cherry Dr. Pepper gasoline here. What I'm gonna do is start to roll the engine over. Well, I'm gonna put a little fuel in it, start to roll the engine over, and then I'm gonna hook the coil up. So here we go. The choke is shut. Kind of puddled a whole bunch of... Okay, there we go. We got fuel in the carb. We've got spark plugs connected, coil connected, and we are gonna crank over now. Wow, that's awesome. It runs. So this was the exhaust manifold that was on my 1940 Mercury, and I stole the manifold off of this one to put onto that car. So it currently doesn't have any exhaust on it whatsoever, and there's not even a manifold on that side. But the engine starts and runs. I think just because it actually sounded really good, I'm gonna probably start it again, just because that was cool. So let's drop some more fuel back in it. Let's go ahead and hook up the ignition and start it. Yeah, this engine runs. I really have to do some thinking on what I actually want to do with this car, because now that I know it has a good engine, it may be worth putting the radiator back in it and actually having this car drive with this flathead. Probably won't be as fun as if I had a 400 horsepower powertrain in it, but it's original and it runs. Wow, that's awesome. However, my garage is really small and the fumes are really thick, so I have to get out of here before I pass out. So I'm gonna let the air clear out. Well, that's pretty awesome. Turns out this flathead does run. I'm actually kind of surprised at that, because when we bought this car, the trunk was filled with a bunch of extra parts like oil pumps and pistons and gaskets and a lot of engine parts, which made me think that with the locked up engine, he had started to purchase parts and just didn't get around to fixing it. But from what I can tell, this engine actually sounds pretty good for the few seconds that we had it running. I think there's a good chance that maybe I leave this car a flathead. Maybe we do an upgrade to a 12-volt system so that way I can put a radio in it and GPS and things like that if I do want to make it a little more reliable. What would you do? Would you keep it a flathead? I guess I got a lot to think about. Let me know in the comments what you would do.